Take those cuffs off her. Right now. The command sliced through the hallway with such unmistakable authority that every conversation stopped in an instant. A dozen officers turned at once, their expressions shifting from routine confidence to stunned disbelief as Captain Thomas Reed stepped forward, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on one woman standing silently with her wrists restrained. Without another word, he straightened his uniform and addressed her with unmistakable respect. United States Attorney Rachel Monroe. One after another, every officer nearby instinctively snapped to attention. Boots settled firmly against the polished floor. Radios fell silent. Even the restless buzz of the precinct seemed to disappear beneath the weight of a moment no one had expected. Only one man remained frozen, unable to understand why the room around him had changed so completely in a matter of seconds. Officer Daniel Mercer still held the key to the handcuffs in his hand. His confident expression slowly gave way to confusion as he searched the faces around him, hoping someone would explain what was happening. Nobody did. Rachel Monroe simply looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn from the very beginning. There was no anger in her eyes, no satisfaction, no attempt to embarrass him in front of his fellow officers. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. There was certainty. She spoke quietly, almost gently, yet every syllable carried through the silent hallway. You had 7 opportunities to verify who I was. Mercer blinked. 7. His mind raced through the last several minutes, but nothing seemed unusual to him anymore. He had followed his instincts. He had trusted his assumptions. He had believed he already knew the truth before asking a single meaningful question. Rachel continued to hold his gaze without raising her voice. Every one of those opportunities is now part of the record. Somewhere behind the captain, an FBI agent exchanged a brief glance with another federal official. Neither interrupted. Neither needed to. The silence itself had become evidence. Mercer looked toward Captain Reed, expecting support, expecting someone to remind everyone that he had simply been doing his job. Instead, the captain's face remained unreadable. It was the look of a leader realizing that an entire department was about to face questions much larger than one officer's decision. Rachel slowly lowered her eyes toward the steel cuffs around her wrists before looking back at Mercer. Authority begins with verification, she said softly. Not assumption. The hallway remained perfectly still. Every officer present understood that whatever had happened moments earlier could not be undone. Every camera mounted along the ceiling had captured it. Every witness standing nearby had seen it unfold. Every ignored warning now carried a different meaning. Mercer finally swallowed, his confidence slipping away as uncertainty replaced certainty for the first time that morning. He looked again at the woman standing before him, wondering how a routine encounter had transformed into the quietest room he had ever stood inside. 27 minutes earlier, none of them knew this morning would change everything. 27 minutes earlier, the Richmond Police Department looked no different from any other precinct waking up to another busy weekday. Fluorescent lights hummed above polished tile floors. Dispatch radios crackled with routine updates. Officers carried steaming coffee cups from one desk to another while detectives hurried through stacks of reports that seemed to grow higher every hour. Outside, a cool Virginia morning settled over the city as commuters filled the streets, unaware that inside the building a single decision was about to expose far more than anyone expected. Rachel Monroe stepped out of a dark gray sedan parked across the street and paused for only a moment before walking toward the entrance. She wore a tailored navy suit, carried a slim leather portfolio, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce her position. There was no security detail surrounding her, no official vehicle with flashing lights, no federal escort opening doors. That was intentional. She had requested to arrive alone because she wanted to see how people were treated before titles entered the conversation. Inside her portfolio rested a sealed federal briefing marked for Captain Thomas Reed alone. The meeting had been scheduled weeks earlier. Only a handful of people inside the department even knew she was coming. Rachel climbed the front steps at an unhurried pace, noticing details that most visitors ignored. A patrol vehicle had been left idling beside the curb. A maintenance worker greeted every officer who walked by, but received almost no acknowledgement in return. 2 young recruits held the front door open for an elderly visitor before immediately returning to serious expressions once they stepped back inside. Small moments often revealed the character of an organization long before official policies ever could. Rachel quietly observed each one. As she entered the lobby, the scent of fresh coffee mixed with paper files and floor polish. Citizens waited patiently in molded plastic chairs while a receptionist answered calls with practiced efficiency. Rachel approached the security desk with a polite smile. Before she could introduce herself, Officer Daniel Mercer looked up from his computer screen. His eyes moved from her face to the portfolio in her hand and back again. Something about his expression changed almost immediately. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice unless someone was watching carefully. Rachel noticed. She had seen that look before in countless buildings across the country. It was not curiosity. It was judgment arriving before conversation. She offered a calm greeting. "Good morning. I have a scheduled meeting with Captain Thomas Reed." Mercer leaned back in his chair instead of reaching for the visitor log. "Do you have identification?" His voice sounded professional enough, but the warmth never reached it. Rachel nodded and carefully removed her federal credentials from her portfolio without making any sudden movement. She placed them on the counter where they were clearly visible beneath the overhead lights. Mercer glanced down for barely a second before pushing the credentials back toward her without reading the name. "Those can be printed anywhere," he said flatly. Rachel remained composed. "You are welcome to contact the captain. He is expecting me." Mercer folded his arms. "We will decide that after I ask a few questions." Rachel slowly closed her portfolio again, meeting his eyes without raising her voice. Somewhere upstairs, Captain Reed glanced at the conference room clock, unaware that the first opportunity to prevent everything that followed had already been placed directly in front of Officer Daniel Mercer and quietly ignored. Mercer never reached for the phone, sitting less than a foot away from his keyboard. He did not call Captain Thomas Reed. He did not contact the United States Attorney's Office. He did not ask dispatch to verify the appointment. Instead, he studied Rachel Monroe as though her appearance alone answered every question he intended to ask. Rachel noticed the decision before he spoke another word. Experience had taught her that facts rarely changed a mind that had already settled on a conclusion. She kept her voice steady. "Captain Reed has a copy of my meeting confirmation. If you contact his office, this will be resolved in less than a minute." Mercer gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "If your story checks out, then there will not be a problem." Rachel gently slid a folded letter across the counter. The official federal seal was clearly embossed across the top of the page. Beneath it was the captain's name and the scheduled meeting time. Mercer barely glanced at the document before pushing it back toward her. "Paper does not prove anything," he replied. Rachel accepted the letter without argument. That was the second opportunity. Nearby, Officer Emily Carter looked up from reviewing an incident report. She had been listening without appearing to listen. Something about the exchange felt unusual. She quietly walked closer under the pretense of organizing paperwork at a neighboring desk. Her eyes immediately caught the federal seal on Rachel's folder. Emily had completed interagency training only 6 months earlier. She recognized the format instantly. "Daniel," she said carefully, keeping her tone respectful. "Maybe we should call upstairs. Captain Reed has visitors scheduled all morning." Mercer did not even look at her. "I know how to handle the front desk." Emily hesitated before returning to her paperwork, but her attention never left the conversation. Rachel remained remarkably composed. She neither protested nor displayed frustration. Instead, she placed another item on the counter. It was a business card bearing her full name, office address in Richmond, and a direct government telephone number. "You may call this number if you would like independent verification," she said. Mercer picked up the card, studied it for a brief moment, then set it back down. "Anyone can print business cards." That was the third opportunity. Rachel slowly drew a quiet breath. Around them, the morning routine continued. Citizens checked in for appointments. Officers exchanged case updates. Someone laughed in a distant hallway. Ordinary life continued only a few yards away, completely unaware that a simple verification process was quietly being replaced by assumption. Rachel looked toward the digital clock mounted above the reception area. The scheduled meeting was now only minutes away. She spoke with the same calm confidence she had carried since entering the building. "Captain Reed will begin wondering why I have not arrived." Mercer folded his arms once more. "If he is expecting you, he can wait." Rachel nodded almost imperceptibly, as though recording the statement in her memory. She understood something Mercer did not. Every ignored document, every dismissed explanation, and every refusal to verify identity was creating its own timeline. The evidence was no longer limited to paper. It now included choices. Emily glanced once more toward the federal credentials still resting on the counter. Her instincts urged her to make the call herself, but years inside the department had taught her how quickly questioning a senior officer could become tomorrow's disciplinary conversation. Even so, doubt continued to grow inside her. Upstairs, Captain Reed checked his watch again, while several floors away an incoming federal call appeared on the communications board waiting for someone to answer. The fourth opportunity had just arrived. The communications console chimed softly as an incoming call from a federal office appeared on the screen. The dispatcher glanced toward the front desk. "Daniel, this one says it is for Captain Reed. Do you want me to transfer it upstairs?" Mercer did not even turn around. "Tell them he is unavailable," he answered without hesitation. The dispatcher frowned for a moment before following the instruction. Rachel listened quietly. She did not interrupt. She simply watched another opportunity disappear. That was the fifth. A few seconds later, her phone vibrated inside her portfolio. She looked at the screen without unlocking it. The caller identification displayed Agent Marcus Hill. She placed the phone back into the portfolio without answering. Mercer noticed the movement immediately. "Hand me the phone," he said. Rachel calmly looked up. "It is an official government device." "I did not ask whose phone it is," Mercer replied. "I asked you to hand it over." Rachel paused briefly before placing it on the counter. She neither argued nor resisted. The screen illuminated once again as the same name appeared. Agent Marcus Hill. Mercer reached over, silenced the call, and placed the phone face down on the desk. "You will get it back later," he said. Rachel studied him for a moment. "That call could have answered every question you have asked." Mercer shrugged. "Or it could have been part of the act." That was the sixth opportunity. Emily Carter felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had now seen the official credentials, the appointment letter, the government business card, the incoming federal telephone call, and Rachel's complete willingness to cooperate. None of it had changed Mercer's approach. Emily quietly walked toward the dispatcher. "I can run the appointment through the internal calendar," she whispered. Before the dispatcher could answer, Mercer looked up. "Emily." His voice was calm, but unmistakably firm. "Return to your assignment." She hesitated. "I just think that was not a suggestion." Emily stopped speaking. She slowly returned to her desk, but something inside her refused to settle. She discreetly opened the incident logging system on her computer and noted the current time. Habit told her to move on. Conscience told her to pay attention. Rachel glanced toward the large wall clock again. Less than 5 minutes remained before the scheduled meeting. She spoke with the same measured tone she had maintained since walking through the front door. "Officer Mercer, you still have time to contact Captain Reed. This situation does not need to become more complicated." Mercer folded his hands across his duty belt. "The only complication I see is someone refusing to tell me the truth." Rachel held his gaze for several quiet seconds. "I have told you the truth from the beginning." Neither of them raised a voice. The contrast between them became impossible to ignore. One relied on certainty without verification. The other relied on patience without fear. Around them, several officers had quietly begun watching from nearby hallways. No one stepped forward. No one asked to review the documents resting on the counter. No one questioned why every reasonable request for verification had been dismissed. Rachel slowly gathered her appointment letter and placed it back inside the portfolio with deliberate care. Then she looked directly at Mercer one final time. "This is your last opportunity to confirm my identity before you make a decision you cannot take back." Mercer answered without hesitation. "I have already made my decision." Rachel gave a nearly imperceptible nod, as though marking the end of a checklist only she could see. The seventh opportunity had just passed, and somewhere upstairs, Captain Thomas Reed stood from the conference table, realizing that the guest who had never once arrived was no longer simply running late. Captain Thomas Reed stood at the head of the conference table, glancing once more at the empty chair reserved for Rachel Monroe. The meeting had been scheduled with remarkable precision. Rachel had never been late to a professional briefing. Not once. Reed quietly closed the folder in front of him and looked toward Agent Marcus Hill, who had just entered the room carrying a tablet. "Have you heard from her?" Reed asked. Marcus shook his head. She confirmed her arrival 10 minutes ago. After that, nothing. Reed frowned. That is not like her. Marcus quickly attempted. Another call. The connection rang several times before ending without an answer. He tried again. The same result. He lowered the tablet and looked toward the captain. Her government phone is active, but she is not responding. Reed walked to the conference room window overlooking the front parking lot. Rachel's sedan remained exactly where it had been when she arrived. She had made it to the building. She simply had not reached the meeting. Where is she? Reed murmured. Downstairs, Rachel remained standing with quiet composure as Officer Daniel Mercer completed routine paperwork with complete confidence in his own judgment. Every signature he placed on the form convinced him he was following proper procedure. Rachel watched each movement carefully. She was not studying the paperwork itself. She was observing the process. Every decision left a record. Every instruction created a timeline. Every witness standing nearby became another piece of the story that would eventually need to be told. Emily Carter could no longer ignore the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. She quietly opened the department scheduling system on her computer. The calendar immediately displayed a confidential appointment assigned to Captain Thomas Reed. Visitor name, Rachel Monroe. Access level, restricted. Emily stared at the screen for a heartbeat before quickly minimizing the window as Mercer glanced in her direction. She understood enough to know one thing with certainty. Rachel had been telling the truth from the moment she walked through the front entrance. Emily reached for the office telephone, intending to call upstairs herself. Before she could press the first number, Mercer noticed the movement. Emily. She looked up. Yes. Leave the phone alone. She hesitated. Captain Reed should probably know his visitor is here. Mercer answered without looking away from his paperwork. I said leave it alone. Emily slowly withdrew her hand. The room felt strangely smaller than it had only minutes earlier. Across the lobby, several officers exchanged uncertain glances, but no one challenged the instruction. Rachel remained remarkably calm. She understood something few people inside the building yet realized. Moments like this rarely depended on one bad decision. They depended on many people deciding that silence was easier than speaking. Upstairs, Marcus Hill activated the location service connected to Rachel's government phone. A blue indicator appeared almost immediately. He zoomed in once, then again. The signal did not point somewhere across Richmond. It did not even point outside the building. It showed the phone inside police headquarters. Marcus looked directly at Reed. She is here. Reed turned sharply. Where? Marcus enlarged the map until individual floors became visible. The signal stopped moving. Main lobby. Reed did not waste another second. He headed for the conference room door with Marcus only a step behind, unaware that by the time they reached the first floor, the quiet choices made over the previous several minutes would already have changed the future of more than one career. As Captain Thomas Reed and Agent Marcus Hill moved quickly toward the elevator, Rachel Monroe remained exactly where she was, composed despite the growing tension around her. Officer Daniel Mercer interpreted her calmness as defiance instead of confidence. He believed that if she had truly been who she claimed to be, someone important would have appeared by now. He did not realize they already were. Rachel quietly rested one hand on her portfolio and looked across the lobby, her eyes briefly following the security cameras mounted above the entrance. Every angle mattered. Every second mattered. She had spent years building cases that depended not on emotion, but on facts preserved exactly as they occurred. She knew those cameras had captured every request she made, every document she presented, and every opportunity that had been ignored. Mercer stepped closer with the same certainty that had guided every decision since Rachel entered the building. You are coming with me until we finish sorting this out, he said. Rachel met his eyes without hesitation. You still have the ability to prevent a serious mistake. Mercer gave a dismissive shake of his head. The mistake was walking in here expecting everyone to believe a story without proof. Rachel answered quietly. The proof has been in front of you the entire time. Emily Carter looked from Rachel to the documents still resting on the counter. She could no longer convince herself that remaining silent was the safest choice. She stood and addressed Mercer once more. Daniel, I checked the internal schedule. Captain Reed really is expecting a visitor named Rachel Monroe this morning. Mercer frowned. You checked a restricted calendar? Emily swallowed. I wanted to make sure we were not missing something. What you are missing, Mercer replied firmly, is that I am handling this situation." Emily lowered her eyes, but only for a moment. Deep inside, she understood that loyalty to procedure was not the same as loyalty to justice. Around the lobby, conversations had faded. Officers who had originally paid little attention were now quietly watching from nearby hallways. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the growing tension but unwilling to interrupt a fellow officer. Rachel noticed every reaction. She knew that systems were rarely defined only by the person making the decision. They were also shaped by the people who watched without asking questions. Upstairs, the elevator doors opened before Captain Reed had fully stopped pressing the button. Marcus checked the location signal again. "Still on the first floor," he said. Reed increased his pace. The distance from the command offices to the lobby was barely a minute, yet it suddenly felt much longer. Back downstairs, Mercer reached toward Rachel's portfolio. "I will hold on to this until we verify everything." Rachel gently kept one hand on it. "That folder contains protected federal material intended for Captain Reed." Mercer answered immediately. "Then Captain Reed can collect it later." Rachel slowly released the portfolio without resistance. She had never intended to win an argument. She intended to let every decision speak for itself. The lobby clock advanced another minute. Somewhere beyond the reception area, footsteps echoed through the corridor, growing louder with every passing second. Mercer remained focused on Rachel, unaware that those approaching footsteps belonged to the very people who could confirm her identity with a single glance. Rachel heard them first. She lifted her eyes toward the hallway entrance, her expression unchanged. She did not smile. She did not announce who was coming. She simply waited, because sometimes the strongest evidence did not arrive in the form of a document. Sometimes it walked through the door. The footsteps grew louder until they echoed across the marble floor with unmistakable purpose. Captain Thomas Reed appeared first, followed closely by Agent Marcus Hill and two federal officials carrying identification folders. Their expressions were focused, but the moment Reed looked toward the reception area, everything changed. His eyes landed on Rachel Monroe. For a fraction of a second, complete disbelief crossed his face. Then his posture became perfectly straight. Without hesitation, he stopped several feet away and spoke in a clear voice that carried through the entire lobby. "United States Attorney Rachel Monroe." Every conversation ended. Officers who had been walking through the hallway instinctively turned toward the sound. Reed took one respectful step forward. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for what has happened." The room seemed to forget how to breathe. One by one, officers standing nearby straightened their posture. The casual atmosphere that had filled the lobby only moments earlier disappeared beneath a silence so complete that even the faint hum of the air conditioning became noticeable. Daniel Mercer looked from Rachel to Captain Reed, then to the federal officials behind him. His confident expression slowly faded as he searched for an explanation that no longer existed. Agent Marcus Hill stepped beside Reed and immediately recognized the government phone resting on the reception counter. "That belongs to United States Attorney Monroe," he said evenly. His eyes moved to the leather portfolio. "And that folder contains protected federal documents scheduled for this morning's briefing." Mercer opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He had expected questions. Instead, he was surrounded by answers. Reed looked directly at Mercer. "Officer, why? Was my scheduled guest prevented from attending a confidential federal meeting?" Mercer hesitated. "She claimed to be." He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. Rachel calmly completed it for him. "I claim to be exactly who I am." Nobody challenged her. Nobody could. Emily Carter quietly stepped forward from her desk, her voice careful but steady. "Captain," she presented federal credentials, an appointment letter, a government business card, and requested that we contact you several times. Reed slowly turned toward her. "Was that request denied?" Emily lowered her eyes briefly before answering. "Yes, sir." The words settled over the room with enormous weight. Rachel remained composed. She did not raise her voice or demand an apology. Instead, she looked at Reed with the same calm professionalism she had carried since entering the building. "Captain, I would like every security recording from the lobby preserved immediately." Reed nodded without hesitation. "It will be done. I would also like all communication logs from the front desk secured before any records are altered." "Yes, ma'am." Rachel continued in the same measured tone. "No conclusions today. Only facts." Marcus Hill gave a slight nod of approval. That single sentence reflected exactly why she had earned the respect of every federal official who worked beside her. She never rushed toward judgment. She followed evidence wherever it led. Mercer finally understood that the issue before him was no longer whether Rachel's identity had been verified. The issue was every decision made before anyone bothered to verify it. Reed looked around the lobby at the officers standing silently nearby. No one is to access the surveillance system until federal investigators review it. Several officers answered together. Yes, sir. Rachel glanced briefly toward Emily, whose quiet honesty had become the first voice willing to interrupt the silence. Then she returned her attention to the room. Respect for the law begins long before anyone learns a person's title, she said softly. It begins the moment they walk through the door. No one moved until Rachel Monroe gave a slight nod. Only then did Captain Thomas Reed quietly instruct an officer to remove the restraints. The sound of the lock releasing was almost imperceptible, yet in the silence of the lobby, it seemed louder than every conversation that had filled the building earlier that morning. Rachel gently adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, picked up her portfolio, and thanked the officer with calm professionalism. She did not look toward Daniel Mercer with anger or triumph. She simply turned her attention to the work that had brought her there in the first place. That unexpected composure unsettled Mercer more than any accusation could have. He had prepared himself for outrage, for public embarrassment, for raised voices. Instead, he faced something far more difficult. He faced quiet accountability. Captain Reed took a slow breath before speaking. Officer Mercer, I am directing you to step away from the reception area effective immediately. Another supervisor will complete all remaining duties here. Mercer stared at the captain. Sir, I was only trying to protect the building. Reed answered without raising his voice. Protecting the building begins with following procedure. Verification is procedure. Mercer looked around the lobby, hoping someone might support his explanation. No one spoke. The officers who had watched the encounter now seemed more interested in the floor than in meeting his eyes. Emily Carter remained at her workstation, still processing everything she had witnessed. Rachel walked toward her and offered a small, reassuring smile. Thank you for choosing accuracy over comfort, she said quietly. Emily looked surprised. I should have spoken sooner. Rachel gently shook her head. What matters is that you spoke before the truth disappeared. Those words stayed with Emily long after the conversation ended. Agent Marcus Hill opened his tablet and began issuing instructions to the federal team. Secure all lobby surveillance beginning 30 minutes before Ms. Monroe entered the building. Preserve telephone records from the reception desk. Archive visitor logs, radio communications, and access control data. Each instruction was acknowledged immediately. Rachel listened without interruption before adding one more request. Please preserve the records exactly as they exist. No assumptions. No summaries. Only original evidence. Marcus nodded. Understood. Reed turned toward the communications supervisor. From this moment forward, no recordings, reports, or electronic files connected to this morning are to be modified, deleted, or replaced without written authorization. The supervisor answered immediately. Yes, Captain. Mercer slowly removed his access card from around his neck as instructed. The gesture was quiet, almost ordinary, yet everyone understood its significance. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. The department's own policies were now taking their natural course. Rachel finally opened the portfolio that had remained closed throughout the entire encounter. Inside were carefully organized briefing materials, federal correspondence, and a confidential case file bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. Reed recognized the cover immediately. His expression grew even more serious. This briefing concerns our department, does it not? Rachel met his eyes. It concerns patterns, procedures, and public trust. This morning did not create the investigation. It simply added another verified fact to it. A profound silence settled over the lobby once again. In that moment, everyone present understood the difference between authority and credibility. One could be displayed with a badge. The other had to be earned through every decision, every action, and every choice made when no one believed the moment would ever be remembered. The conference room felt different when everyone finally took their seats. The briefing no longer began with introductions because every person present had already witnessed the most important lesson of the morning. Rachel Monroe placed the confidential file at the center of the table and looked around the room before speaking. Her voice remained calm, measured, and unwavering. This investigation was never about proving that one person could make a mistake. It was about determining whether procedures protect the public when assumptions replace verification. No one interrupted. Captain Thomas Reed sat quietly, reviewing the timeline that had already been assembled from phone records, visitor logs, security footage, and witness statements. Every minute had been documented. Every request Rachel had made could be confirmed. Every opportunity to verify her identity had been declined. Facts required no dramatic interpretation. They simply existed. Rachel opened the first folder and carefully arranged several documents across the table. Our office has spent months reviewing patterns involving public complaints, incomplete verification procedures, and failures to follow established policy. This morning provided something investigators rarely receive. It provided a complete sequence captured in real time from beginning to end. Agent Marcus Hill displayed still images taken from the surveillance system. They showed Rachel presenting her credentials, offering the appointment letter, placing the government business card on the counter, and waiting patiently while each opportunity for verification passed. The room remained silent. Emily Carter had also been invited to provide a factual account of what she observed. She answered every question carefully, never exaggerating, never minimizing, simply describing events exactly as they occurred. Rachel thanked her for her professionalism. Integrity is not measured by speaking when it is easy, she said. It is measured by speaking when silence would be more comfortable. Emily nodded quietly, understanding that those words would stay with her throughout her career. Captain Reed looked toward the assembled supervisors. Beginning today, this department will review visitor verification procedures, communication protocols, and supervisory notification requirements. We cannot ask this community to trust us if we do not first demonstrate that we deserve its trust. There was no applause, no celebration, only thoughtful agreement. Rachel closed the final folder and stood. Before leaving, she paused beside the doorway and looked back at the officers gathered inside. Many people stood at attention after learning my title, she said softly. The greater challenge is to show that same respect before you know a person's name, profession, or position. The law does not ask us to guess who deserves fairness. It requires us to extend fairness to everyone. No one forgot those words. In the weeks that followed, procedures were strengthened, additional training was introduced, and every recommendation focused on accountability rather than appearances. The lesson spread far beyond one department because it reminded everyone that public confidence is built through ordinary decisions repeated every single day. Daniel Mercer would remember that morning for the rest of his life, not because someone raised a voice at him, but because the evidence reflected his own choices with perfect clarity. Rachel Monroe left the building exactly as she had entered it, without demanding recognition or special treatment, carrying only the quiet confidence that truth does not need to announce itself to prevail. Some people believe authority begins with a badge. That day, an entire department discovered that real authority begins with humility, verification, and the courage to treat every person with dignity before knowing who they are.